I do hope you have large quantities of water on hand, because I don't know about you, but I'm about to get flamed. Yes, I've picked quite a controversial title, but let me explain. I'm not saying you have to like Twilight or you're sexist. That would be rather authoritarian of me. Plus it would have no grounding in feminism or literary theory. Everyone reads books and forms their own opinions of said books, and everyone is entitled to whatever opinion that may be. You are allowed to hate Twilight, but what's currently being lost on the internet and in reading communities in general is you're also allowed to like Twilight. You're allowed to love it if your personal opinions so incline you to. Reading communities have reached a state at the moment where people are ashamed to like Twilight. The admission of doing so would be greeted with the questioning of one's intelligence. People nowadays only admit to liking Twilight after the proviso, I know it's not great literature, but, I know it's silly, but, I know it's absolute rubbish, but. I want to liberate Twilight fans. In fact, more generally, I want to liberate romance fans. Most of what I'm saying can probably apply just as easily to any book that falls within the romance genre. I've just picked Twilight because it's an easy reference point at the moment. My above title, aligning Twilight hating to sexism, is because a lot of people who do hate it talk about it as if there is something intrinsically bad within the genre of romance. And yet, often the people who are leading the charge against the Twilight fandom are people who find great pleasure in their own form of gratuitous reading, or gratuitous film watching, or gratuitous music listening, just in other genres. Why is it worse to enjoy romance novels than, say, tragedies, or thrillers, or adventure novels? Why is there so much more stigma in going to see a Twilight film than a Transformers film? In many ways, these genres are just as gratuitous, and yet romance is a feminine gratuity. And in my opinion, this is why it is looked on as so much worse than others. People forget that feminism is not the subjugation of all ideas and all traits which are considered feminine. In fact, that's still sexism in a sense that was around years and years ago. Feminine traits are lesser, and thus the people who adopt them are lesser. Equal gender rights are not simply found in women taking on male traits. They're found in the breaking down of these gender norms. Until attitudes like these are viewed as neither male nor female. It is when this happens that I believe romance will lose its stigma. If you disagree with me that romance is stigmatised for being a feminine genre, then you have to think there is something intrinsically bad in the romance formula. Something that opens it up to more ridicule than, say, the daring leaps of moving trains in adventure, or the poisoned hip flask in whodunit detective novels, or the moving machines and large explosions of such films as the Transformers franchise. Please don't think I'm trying to lower these forms to the debasement Twilight currently faces. I'm absolutely sure I've enjoyed books and films that fit into every one of these categories. All I'm trying to do is beg some mercy for Twilight lovers. If someone is reading for pleasure, why should they not read Twilight? If that's what they enjoy, then let them. You may not share that enjoyment, but please don't scorn romance as something inherently worse, and thus for inherently lesser people, than any book which is constructed to form a fun read. Some people actually do argue that Twilight is worse than other romances. One of the most common arguments spouted, and which I've seen most recently on the Sarcaschicks channel, is that Edward and Bella's relationship is unhealthy. That Bella is a bad role model, and in a phrase that I brilliantly saw used in a recent Tumblr article, young girls must be protected from such awful examples or else their fragile lady brains will extrapolate elements of the film and apply them to their real life in wrong situations. Firstly, such arguments always take the work from their context, most often arguing that Bella's love for Edward teaches a love for abusive relationships. It's an argument that only works when people ignore the fact that it's a fantasy book with fantastical characters. I can easily take any book and make it sound ludicrous if I take a single element of it and present it without its context. These books teach young girls that they should make out with people on TV for material gain. Or, these books teach young readers they should solve all their problems by pointing slight sticks of wood at things and shouting garbled Latin. Ridiculous. More importantly than this though, I balk at the idea that books have to set a good example. It's no longer the 1700s and I'm not really a fan of Miss Goody Two-Shoes. I read books about murderers, about prostitutes, about cannibals, yet I'm probably not going to base my moral understanding on theirs. Quite frankly, it's been a long time since the reading public took good examples as their romantic heroes. I mean, Heathcliff is one of the most well-known romantic heroes throughout the literary canon, and yet in many ways I would argue that his and Cathy's relationship is much more abusive than Edward and Bella's. I would definitely challenge anyone who argued that Heathcliff is a good role model. I mean, an example, again, my favourite Tumblr article pointed us to, he hangs his wife's puppy. And yet, readers are still generally able to distinguish that this is probably not the ideal trait to look for in a mate. Let me finish by stressing that I'm not saying everyone should love Twilight. I'm just fed up of hearing the same tired arguments over and over again about how Twilight is necessarily bad, and anyone who likes it is necessarily stupid. What I want is to see people saying they don't like it, but giving credit and credence to those who do. As people do with crime fiction and action movies. I want people to feel they can say they like it without being castigated. What I'm basically trying to say is, it's okay not to like things, but don't be a dick about it.